I am Halli Casser-Jayne, and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, where along with my partner in politics, former White House correspondent Matthew Cooper, we slice and dice all things politics, and some days, Donald Trump too. This week, what if Jack Dorsey threw Donald Trump off of Twitter? Would the world come to an end? What if Donald Trump wore a mask in public? Would he be the laughingstock of the world? What if ordinary American citizens stood on their balconies and shouted, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore"? What if? What if? Joining me at my table this week is former editor-in-chief of Salon and author of Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy, the always astute David Daley. But up first, we begin with our weekly take on the political scene. It's time for Halli and Matt. Here we go. Welcome, my friends, and here's where we are this week. There are 102,197 dead American souls, 1,747,781 million confirmed cases in the U.S., more than any other country per capita. All 50 states are at least partially reopened, even though as of yesterday, at least 20 of them had recorded a clear upward trend of average new daily cases over the prior week. Some hospitals already overwhelmed by the new cases, and 41 million Americans are unemployed. The equivalent of 1 in 4 workers have now filed for benefits. And in case you didn't hear it, Matt, Trump is in a battle royale with Twitter. Good morning, my friend, and how are things in Washington, D.C. this week?
Things are great. The president has his priorities right. He's taking on Twitter. It's very inspiring.
You know, I told you I had a bit of a bad bout with a bad back this week. So, yeah, I've been on the floor all week long, you know, just gripping. The pain has been just ridiculous. But that said, I'm lying on the floor and I'm thinking to myself, this is just insane. We are in insanity. And because insanity has become so normal that insanity doesn't even look insane anymore. I mean, just think about it. How over 100,000 dead, and this doodah is fighting with Jack at Twitter. And people are like, great, applauding. Isn't this terrific? You'll have to explain some of this to me, because I think this virus, which they're discovering, you know, comes out in many, many forms and has many, attributes to it. I think one of them is that it affects people's minds.
It is remarkable. I mean, I'm not surprised. You know, it's shocking, but not surprising in a way. I mean, he's always had enemies, and he's always had people who he has a fit with. And, the fact that we've been in this epidemic with mass deaths hasn't really changed that at all. You know, this is what he does. The question is whether it's deliberate strategy to distract from the real problems he and the country are having, or if it's just that he's incapable of controlling himself. I don't know which is worse.
So, not to beat a dead horse, but I think in this instance it's worth going back to, and that is the people who are around him, Matt. And you really have to say to yourself, now, come on, they can't agree with him unless there are a billion people who are wackier than a jaybird out there. But even those surrounding him, even the Republicans in Congress, I mean, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but I mean, they're going to lose the Senate. I mean, some of their stalwarts are in absolute hard shape at this point. Now, I don't see how they recover a Susan Collins, even a Lindsey Graham. As I said, we'll talk about it in a minute. But at what point do they just go, wait a minute, he's taking us down too? I mean, come on, this is crazy. I mean, would you let him take you down? I wouldn't let him go down the tubes with him.
No, I mean, but they've yoked themselves to him, mostly to avoid primary battles. That was certainly the case with Collins and Graham and others, and they're stuck with him. I think it's tough for them to try to separate from him at this late date. So they're just going to try.
Why?
Why?
Why is it? Why can't they separate from him at this late date?
Well, I think at this point they're just there's such a long public record of their being attached to him. And frankly, I think, they worry about diminishing their base. They just, want to see if they can ride this out.
So let me ask you this. I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to say to you, what if Lindsey Graham, for argument's sake, I don't think anybody will ever believe a word Susan Collins says, but what if Lindsey Graham were to come out and say, I was wrong. This is wrong. What's happening here is wrong. Let's say I'm putting the country before me. We need to talk, America. A hero.
Well, I don't know. They've been so attached to him at this point. I think it might look craven for them to do it, or maybe it would be the smart thing. I don't know, but clearly they're not.
Yeah, it boggles the mind. All right, let me get back to coronavirus for a minute before we go back into that. The data is very confusing, and this is what I wanted to talk to my good friend Matt about. You read it, I read it, I listen. You listen less to cable, but there is no way for anybody to really discern what is going on here because the data is all over the place depending upon where you go and who you listen to what day. Now, I personally think that was Trump's motive, which is why he threw it back to the states partly, didn't have a federal control over it so that there would be one number the feds put out and we would be. This is a nightmare here. I'm looking at the data in Florida and they're up 67 deaths day before yesterday. But then when you look at hospitalizations, it doesn't compute. I mean, now we know that Ron DeSantis has been, fudging the numbers, if you will, but that's across the board. That's not just in this state. Does that concern, have you seen that as well? And isn't that odd? That we can't get real numbers. The only number that stays consistent is the one on that one website that tells us that 102,197 Americans died as of this morning.
Yeah, well, certainly in Florida, there's, it does feel like there's been some real fudging, and as you know, very hard to get the original breakdowns out of the administration in Tallahassee. Look, I think the basic pattern is what we know is that it's gone down a lot of places, especially the states where it hit most severely, and it's coming up in others. And we're gonna see what happens. But I think we're getting pretty realistic numbers out of most places. Florida seems
the outlier.
Shakiest.
Yeah. Well, I say it because I'm going to say something you might find shocking, but when you pay attention to what's happening, for instance, in Alabama is a really good example. Crazy Republican governor. She was nuts before all this started. But they open up. Montgomery is a mess. I understand there is just not a hospital room to be had anywhere in the vicinity. It's so overwhelmed. It's back to what you saw workers, frontline workers saying in New York at New York's peak. And of course, she's opening up more. She's like, okay, big deal. Nope, we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to open it up. I bring it up because Joe Scarborough this morning, I was watching, and we're going to talk about Joe in a second, Twitter, etc. But he's towing the Republican line. And this is where controversy might, out of my mouth. Here we go again, Halli. We have to get the economy up and running. We have to get the economy up and running. Trump put that out there, and little by little, everybody started saying it. Democrats started saying it too, and it's because everybody's afraid of being labeled, if I say, no, you need to shut it down, then you're working on getting him not reelected. Fact of the matter is, if my kid was in my, I was still a youngster and I had to say, you're going to go to school, you're not going to go to school. I know right now I would say, no, you're not going to school. Nope, not going to happen. And I think that any smart adult at this point, seeing things as they are, would say, I don't think it's time really. Maybe we ought to fix this now and then we won't have to come back and fix it when it becomes a real mess in a couple of months again because we're towing the line. Everybody has to go back to work. You said it to me on the show last week. That's what got me going on this because you said, now we have to get to work. No, I'm saying, why? Maybe we don't. Maybe there's a different way to do this. Maybe this is just playing Trump. He put the word out and we're all going to follow him down the road to hell.
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, we are in a quasi depression because of the shutdown, and that was necessary. But there are lots of liberal governors who are not following Trump who are saying the same thing, that we can open up, we can do it safely, we can do it in a measured and secure way. You're hearing that from Cuomo, where a lot of the state is beginning to open up. They're doing it carefully by region. And, pretty much every state, whether they have a liberal governor, a conservative governor, whether they have a reckless governor or a careful governor, is doing some opening up. They're not maintaining the same policies they had 2 months ago.
And let me say this to you. Let me interject this and ask you what you think of this. The states are in a terrible financial state, right? They're in a mess. That's Trump. And that's Trump purposefully. That's, Nancy said, you got to give money to the states. And the Republicans went, I think we're going to just put more judges on the bench. And that's what we're going to focus on for the next month and a half, because they're forcing the governors to put people back to work just to save the states from going bankrupt. It's a political game.
Well, look, I think you're right to say that they haven't provided the aid to states that they need to, and the Republicans have played games by, finding the time to put more of their judges on the bench rather than,
take up legislation
to the states, right? And they bailed out lots of other things, but not, they clearly have to do it with the states. But I don't think that's the only reason Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo and
no, you can also get into they're worried about people going, crazy, mad, whatever the hell it is. I think it's going to be interesting. In fairness to all of this, they said that when they started to open up, it was going to be like Spike City, and so far I don't know that it is Spike City. Could Trump have been right that come the summer this virus kind of retreats a little bit? That's a possibility too. I mean, in the interest of fairness. But the fact of the matter is, it is spiking in some places. And, since they're not testing properly, since some of the tests that they thought were working aren't working, I say, Matt, and there's no tracing, virtually no tracing, it's all a recipe for, kaboom. That's what I say. And, that kaboom comes maybe too late to save another 100,000 souls. It's interesting that Dr. Birx yesterday said that despite what everybody else is saying, she doesn't see this coming in anywhere under 200,000 dead when all is said and done. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Yeah. So, the other one is the mask controversy. Do you remember the Lone Ranger?
Sure.
Yeah. Remember Zorro?
Yeah, sure. Right.
Remember when wearing a mask was like, wow, that was the person who was going to save us?
Right. Masks were cool.
Yeah. No more. You got anything on that? Because I find this whole thing, I mean, there was a great photo of Ivanka and the kids and the husband, and they were dressed to the nines in $5,000 outfits. The kids and Ivanka, and her mask matched her outfit. This was like a $10 million kind of thing. And of course, the husband didn't have a mask on. I think they were walking through an airport on the way to NASA or wherever they were yesterday. So it's my understanding that people in Washington, the legislators, the Republicans are starting to wear masks, including, I guess, and I don't know where this came from. Moscow Mitch even said, wear your mask this morning.
Yeah, look, I think, mask wearing is becoming the new norm. And, Trump is going to be more of the exception because he's not wearing one and refuses to, except very briefly on one factory tour. But I think they're becoming part of life, except for people who are, willfully not wearing them for political reasons. But I think they do seem to be very effective. In terms of the transmission of the coronavirus, they don't protect you, but you protect others when you wear the mask. And likewise, if the other person's wearing them, that's going to do a lot to diminish the spread. And, when you combine that with social distancing and other preventive measures like hand washing, you go a long way towards stemming the spread of this thing.
Yeah, well, this morning they came out with the fact that it spreads by air and it goes from room to room to room and it lasts longer than they thought. And this is why I'm saying to you, they don't know. They just don't know. Every day, they tell you a different story, or they, beware more of this than that. And
I think and so we're still learning a lot.
Yeah, let's get to something fun. Is there anything fun? Deal. Okay. Trump and Jack Dorsey at Twitter. I mean, this is really too much. This is just way too much. What's going on here? You know, the guy's lying on Twitter. If you and I posted a tweet like he posts some of these tweets, you know, goodbye. You know, you're either in Twitter jail or you lose your status at Twitter for months at a time. Twitter's staying alive because of Trump. And he knows that because they were really in a mess before Trump. And now, you know, they're coming back. What happens to Twitter when Trump is gone? But now he's going to issue some executive order. What? Talk to me.
Yeah, well, he's mad that, you know, they're putting labels on his tweets saying this isn't true, and, you know, go here for the facts. And, you know, he's having a fit. So, you know, he's trying to use what few tools he has. I think legally, he's not going to get away with it. But look, you never know what happens with the courts. And look, he's you know, he's a nut. I mean,
the president of the United States is a nut, says former White House correspondent Matthew Cooper. I mean, you know, there we are.
I mean, it's not a clinical definition. I'm not a doctor.
No.
I can't say a nut.
He is a nut. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I'm simply saying you're correct.
Or he's great, or, you know, crazy like a fox. You know, he's actually.
Well, he's not so crazy like a fox. Because if he was crazy like a fox right now, his poll numbers would be to the moon. Because that's right. I was going to say to you, and don't let me forget Mark Zuckerberg because I want to talk about him. But I was actually going to say to you, you know, you keep on doing the same old thing the same old way. One, it gets utterly boring, and I am so bored by this guy, I can't even begin to tell you. He's boring me at this point. Yawn.
Sure.
He really is. But even so, he's not doing himself any favors. His polls are tanking.
Right. His polls are tanking.
So why does he keep doing the same old the same old way?
Yeah. Well, he can't control himself. I mean, he's just not
control himself. He's like a little kid, right?
Right. No, he can't contrul himself.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
he's, you know.
Get the guy some Depends. Maybe that'll help. I don't know. I just, you know, it's just, if Trump were to be kicked off Twitter, I think America would be saved. I actually think Jack Dorsey would be saving America because without Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, who we all know is, you know, he's just challenged in the likability department big time. You know, he has his own agenda. And of course, you know, he's at war with Twitter. So he's like, you know, Twitter was wrong. You know, and he's in the tank for Trump. So, you know, whatever. Are you on Facebook anymore? Because I hardly ever go there anymore because I find it so snarky and stupid and, you know, are you on? Did you?
I've kind of stopped with it.
Yeah. And I only say it because, you know, these are two different mediums, and I don't think that Trump gets the kind of play on Facebook that he ever got on Twitter, and he doesn't bring in everybody, and he doesn't get everybody involved in it so much. But I asked a bunch of my, you know, fellow Twitterites, if whatever we're called, what would happen if Trump left? And some of them said, you know what, I think I'd probably leave because what else? There's nothing here. So I think Dorsey should suspend him for a week and let's see what happens to Trump. Because where does he go? Back to Fox? Even Fox isn't being so nice to him anymore. They're worried.
It's an interesting thought. You know, I don't know what would happen. He'd go ballistic. We know that.
Oh, so what else is new? So yeah, I just think it would be a really interesting thing for Dorsey to do. Right. He retweeted a tweet about killing Democrats this morning, which is definitely in violation of their, you know, rules. If it had been you or I, we would have been lost Twitter forever. So he's got the grounds to do it. Yeah, like I said, I think, you know, even if it's for 48 hours, I think it would be really interesting to see what happens. Because even Sean Hannity has taken up the mantle of masks now at Fox. Right. So Fox is definitely looking to the future and going, this doesn't look good like Trump is going to be in, and we're going to have to change our whole model. Right. And that's why they're doing it slowly. Quickly getting into the election. So Biden emerged wearing a mask and his famous aviator glasses. this week and gave a terrific little thing yesterday for the 100,000 dead, and God bless him. And he's actually looking pretty good, if you ask me, Matt. Well rested, if you will, for all his time in his basement. I want to talk to you about the Veep states very quickly. Stan Greenberg, Dem pollster, very well known, revered, says Biden would win with Elizabeth Warren. I think that would be the biggest mistake in the world if he were to choose her. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah. I mean, strengths and weaknesses, right? Strengths, she kind of galvanizes the liberals and the Bernie types at least a bit. Downside, a little bit scary. If Trump and others can make her seem scary. She didn't do well in the presidential primary. She came in third in her own state. So I don't know how much electoral strength she brings.
And she brings a Republican governor, right?
You mean a senator? Yeah.
No. Her governor from her state is a Republican.
Right. So her seat would be replaced by him.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. That's a real concern. That may be.
And she's white.
Apparently she's white. Yes. Good call.
So astute, those drugs.
Yeah.
I don't see it. And there's a movement against Amy Klobuchar, but young blacks right now. If you elect her, we're not going to go with you, Biden. And personally, if you ask me, I'm all for Miss Florida. Val
Temmings.
Yeah, I just think she brings it all. And I think that at the moment I'm still on what's her name from California. I think she's dangerous because
Harris.
Yeah, I think she's dangerous because I think she screwed up big time, and she's likely to do that again. The death of George Floyd. I'm absolutely sickened by this. I can't tell you. 2020. This is America 2020. This is and that these police officers, at least the one police officer wasn't grabbed and thrown behind bars immediately. This is a travesty. This is truly a travesty. Jeez, you don't even know what to say. You just don't know what to say. You got anything to say?
No, I mean it's very hard to watch the footage of him. It's deeply disturbing. It's lots of local politicians have called on him to be arrested, which is pretty unprecedented, and not unprecedented, but rare. And we'll see what happens on the legal front. We know there were civil disturbances in Minneapolis last night. And look, I think this keeps happening. And I think if it follows a familiar pattern, there will be legal action. There will be criminal action that's likely or could well end in acquittal, but followed by a civil action that will end in a huge judgment against the city. That's what happened in New York in the infamous case of Eric Gardner and in other cities. And that could be where we're heading again.
I can't breathe. And that cop, like Trump, no feelings, none. It devastating. We get to something that makes me happy, space launch, which didn't launch. But I could have told you it wasn't going to launch because it was pouring down here like right. You can't believe it. The
Can
lightning.
You see the launches from where you are?
Yeah, they come over. Yeah.
So that must be kind of cool.
It's totally cool. But I mean, I posted on Twitter, this isn't going to happen because it was just what it was. And this is how it's going to be now. It's hard to do this in the summer because 4 o'clock, boy, I'll tell you, the skies always open up around here. So, But I still have my letters that I wrote. I was a geek when I was a kid, a NASA geek, and I wrote letters to Alan Shepard and John Glenn. I, thank God, got to meet John Glenn years later. And I wrote letters and they wrote back, and I still have those letters. And it was, it's always a good thing. And it's so American, and let's hope they can get off the ground and be safe. But boy, what a difference between, do you remember that you're a little younger than I am, but I remember sitting in our auditorium in my elementary school watching Shepard. You're like 10 years younger than I am, I think. But anyway, so back to that. It was a nice moment. And I want to talk also quickly before we say goodbye for the week. China. What's happening in Hong Kong, is really a travesty because there's a 50-year treaty that says they're not allowed to do what they're doing, which is taking over China. And this is getting lost in coronavirus and everything else that's going on. And I think this is terrible. And I feel for those people. I grew up with a friend who, after the war, her parents came here, but when things got better, they went back to Hong Kong. And only they're going to be chased out again. This is not right. This is just totally not right. And the administration is, politicizing it and not playing it for what it is. I mean, it's a real issue here. It's a real, assault on international law. You got anything to say?
Yes, I agree with all of that. And, unfortunately, I think they'll get away with it. I think, you don't want to praise the administration more than you have to, but I think Pompeo's response has been fairly strong so far, and we'll see if there's anything we can do. But I think it's not unreasonable to think that the Chinese saw an opportunity here with the coronavirus, and so many countries weighed down to, do what they've wanted to do for a while. And I'm sure in Beijing they saw the latest independence waves there and dissent, and they're basically, as you said, abrogating the 50-year treaty.
Yeah, I actually think it's because of the weakness of Trump that they're doing it. They saw the opening and said we better do this now because this guy is going to not be in office, and it won't be so easy to pull this off if it's a Biden administration. That's what I think.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. And that just goes to show you how weak a president this is, and how he's just upended everything. And it's like, week after week we say the same stuff, except it just keeps infiltrating more and more into different aspects of the world zeitgeist, and it's oh so wrong. It's oh so wrong. What else? Anything?
No, I think we'll just, no. I mean, it's awful, and I think he's diminishing American power a lot around the world, and I think that's not a good thing. So I really feel for the people of Hong Kong.
I leave you on this. Senator Susan Collins, today is a great day to tell you to go F yourself. For anybody I want out of office, it's her. She stands for everything that is wrong in Congress today. That's my thought.
I hear you. I think she's probably a goner.
Yeah, she's a goner. Gideon's up by 9.
Yeah.
And Lindsey Graham, by the way, tied with Jamie Harrison. That's amazing to me.
I'd still put money on Graham, but yeah.
At this point, a tie always goes to the incumbent, but I think that
no question.
Jamie Harrison could pull it off, and if they put the right money in there. All right, any prognostications? Was that the right word? Have I been drugged again?
Prognostications? No, I think, we're just going to see more opening up around the country, and the numbers going down in an encouraging way in a lot of places and going up in a very disturbing way in others.
Well, I hope you can get out and have a good time, and at least...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're getting a little opening up, but, I think people are going to be cautious before they start pouring into restaurants or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. And we'll talk
stay
soon.
Safe.
You stay safer.
Okay.
You were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts weekly at hallicasserjayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and on all your favorite apps. You can find the Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Just say, The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Currently a senior fellow for FairVote, David Daley is the author of Rat-Fucked, the true story behind the secret plan to steal America's democracy, the book which helped spark the recent drive to reform gerrymandering, the scourge of this republic. Daley, a frequent lecturer and media source, is the former editor-in-chief of Salon, his work appearing in The New Yorker, The Washington Post, The Guardian, New York Magazine, The Atlantic, The Boston Globe, Rolling Stone. He's made frequent appearances on CNN and NPR. Oh, and here's a bit of trivia for you. When writing for the Hartford Courant, he helped identify Mark Felt as the deep throat source for Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. His new book, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy, offers a much-needed look into the inspirational citizen activists who are taking the bull by the horn and fighting back to unrig America's fragile democracy. You will be inspired, and can't we all use a little inspiration these days? Let's talk with David Daley. So, David, as I said to you off air, could this book be any more timely? I mean, we've got a rogue Republican Party wreaking election havoc all over this country. Their dastardly deeds now, under the tutelage of their rogue leader, Trump. And here we are. And welcome. Oh, God. I'm telling you, every day I say to myself, oh, God. But before we get into Unrigged, I want to talk to you about and I'm going to say it, rat fucked, the true story behind the secret plan to steal America's democracy, your first book. Give us a synopsis of that, because this is going to be very educational to my listeners. I think we assume they know a lot more than they know, including me. I assume sometimes I know more than I actually know. So help us out on that and on gerrymandering and what it is, and you know the drill.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Halli.
Sure.
Gerrymandering is the art, and it's a dark art, of drawing district lines that give you an advantage over the other side in elections. We redraw every state legislative and congressional district every 10 years after the census. And if you've got the power to draw those lines, you can choose your own voters and make it really easy to win election for the next 10 years. Gerrymandering has been with us for a really long time, but Republicans mastered it in 2010 and 2011 in an entirely new way. Here we are in 2020. There are 59 million Americans, nearly 1 in 5 of us, who live in a state where the state legislature, one or both branches, is controlled by the party that won fewer votes in the 2018 election. 1 in 5 of us. This is outrageous. That is the power of gerrymandering. It is how Republicans manage to keep control in competitive states like North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, this entire decade, even with fewer votes. And so much of the anti-majoritarianism in this country, so much of the sort of creeping assault on voter rights and the growth of voter suppression, it begins in many ways in its most modern essence with the Republican victories in state legislatures in 2010 that gave them the right to draw completely tilted maps in 2011, maps that have endured for an entire decade, and insulated Republicans in state legislatures and in Congress from the ballot box and allowed them to embark on voter ID bills, on assaults on early voting, on absentee voting, on vote by mail, on precinct closures. And here we are, right? Here we are in the middle of a pandemic trying to safeguard the 2020 election. And there are states that are making voting much more difficult. They're adding new barriers. And in many ways, all of this is possible because of the original sin of gerrymandering.
So I have to say to you, the mind reels with so many places to go here. Shenanigans. Do you think, as I do, that Republicans are just better at this kind of chicanery than Democrats? I mean, should Democrats take some blame for some of this? And what could they do at that time while all of this was going on? I mean, there is that because, and the reason I bring it up is because there's a problem within the Democratic Party. It just doesn't seem to be as effective as this kind of chicanery. It just doesn't. Talk to me.
Democrats have been really good at gerrymandering over the last 230 years. They took their eyes off the ball, I think, after 2008. Here's what I would say has happened. Republicans have had two options since 2008. Since Barack Obama was elected president, since it became clear that the nation's demographics were changing in a way that favored the Democratic Party, Republicans could have begun outreach towards younger voters, towards voters of color, or they could double down on their base. And that's what Republicans decided to do. They doubled and tripled down on older, whiter, rural voters. And that has forced them to continuously play games. It has forced them to use this kind of chicanery and shenanigans as a means of holding power with fewer voters. Democrats, after the 2008 election, believed that they were at the forefront of this, a coalition of the inevitable, that the demographic changes of the country was going to favor them for a generation. And so in many ways, they fell asleep on redistricting the following year. Republicans recognized that they needed a path back to power and that redistricting provided that path back. So I would say it comes out of desperation. The Republican electoral strategy is to double down on its base. And that means you have to try to make it harder for the other side to vote, and you have to pack them into districts that minimize and dilute their impact.
Let me throw this one at you. And this may be more about the times we're in with Trump at the head of this quote-unquote Republican Party. Democrats play by the rules, David. Trump and Republicans play the rules. That's where we are right now. Do you agree?
I do. I think that what we have seen is a willingness by the Republican Party to engage in this kind of constitutional hardball that Democrats have really never woken up to. Democrats consistently bring, a butter knife to a gunfight, and Republicans have been willing to trample on these sort of small d democratic norms that many of us have taken for granted for a long time. Whether that has to do with the especially toxic gerrymandering that they've done, whether it is voter purges, whether it's, holding a seat open on the Supreme Court until they get a Republican president. You have not seen Democrats willing to fight in that same way.
And that concerns me, I'll tell you, because the old line, nice guys finish last.
I think that's right. We are when one side is willing to engage in that kind of constitutional hardball, and the other side is still playing t-ball. It creates a real crisis in a democracy, and I worry very much that we are sprinting towards that crisis right now.
I promise we're going to get to unrigged. I'm building to it for a very good reason. You'll see. I want to talk about Citizens United for a minute, because I think money in politics has got a lot to do with this rigging of the system as well. There was this piece in The Guardian this morning, I don't know if you saw it, about a new conservative organization fighting to restrict the voting in the 2020 presidential election, which you were just talking about. It's really a rebranded group, by the way. Dark money, same old, helping Trump. It's called the Honest Elections Project. It's backed by DeVos and the Koch brothers. What else is new? They were also known as the Honest Elections Project, and that was who got Kavanaugh and Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. Republicans devote 20,050,000 people to efforts to redistrict voting. And the project was announced it was spending $250,000 in ads in April, warning against voting by mail, which we're going to talk about in depth, and accusing Democrats of cheating. Florida, Colorado, Michigan, this kind of stuff. How do you beat this? That kind of money.
Democrats need to be aware that this is what's going to happen. You're absolutely right. This is the same people playing the same playbook time and again, and they brand themselves now as honest elections, which is, it's so Orwellian that it would make you laugh if it didn't make you cry first.
Yeah.
Listen, I think this suggests a couple of things. First, it suggests this is deeper than just Donald Trump. Donald Trump is elected in 2016. These strategies go back years and years and years. So if Democrats think that they can defeat Donald Trump in 2020 and that will put an end to this anti-small d Democratic fervor and restore normalcy and fairness, they're kidding themselves. This is part of a long-term, many-year, carefully planned out, well-funded strategy to hold power in a nation in which there are fewer Republican voters. And what I think is just as dangerous is that this is a strategy that keeps politicians really, really protected from the voters. There is not a lot of support for the kind of Republican policies that this Congress and many state legislatures are pushing right now. And you see this in the middle of a pandemic. You see that there are huge majorities in favor of additional stimulus, that there are, huge majorities in favor of expanding healthcare. And this is a Republican Party that is sprinting away from all of those things, that is trying to essentially give, tax cuts to billionaires and big corporations and protect the corporations from any liability if folks get sick going back to work. They're acting very much like a party that feels like they can't lose because they've already cooked the rules to their favor.
It is interesting, though. I wasn't going to go there, but I'm going to go there with you. Some of the people who actually were part of building this over those years are some of the people who are no longer on the team. You look at a George Conway, Federalist Society. You look at all the Never-Trumpers, really. It's odd how powerful they were in all of this. It's almost like they're saying to themselves, what have we unleashed?
They unleashed a Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
Is what they unleashed. And if you pumped some of them with truth serum, they would recognize and admit what they have done. They might not do it on the record, but in some ways, some of these Republicans, I do believe, recognize what they've inflicted on the democracy, on the republic, and are attempting in their way to try and fix it. There are a lot of Republicans who were involved in these efforts between, say, 2008, 2010, 2011, who I think they believed they were just trying to help their side win. And that, politics is a game, and they thought that their side was better, and that was who they played for. They played for Team Red, and they were going to do whatever it took to make sure Team Red came out on top on the scoreboard. And that if Democrats were not smart enough to understand that it was a redistricting year, they were playing by the rules, and they won. So they outsmarted the other side. Well, they did. They outsmarted the other side. But they ended up remaking these maps and redrawing these districts and creating so many uncompetitive districts that there were unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences are when you create that many uncompetitive districts, you push the power center to the right because the general election no longer matters. The only election that matters is a primary in an uncompetitive district. So in an open seat, the most conservative person is most likely to win. The craziest of the crazy are going to have an advantage in a low turnout off-season primary. And it re-incentivizes those who are already in office. They don't have to worry about a general election challenge. All they have to worry about is a primary. So they guard their base. They're not willing to sort of reach out to the other side. They're not willing to engage in consensus building because that's the kind of stuff that, riles up talk radio and makes Ann Coulter tweet about them. So they completely twisted politics off its axis in a way that I don't think they imagined. John Boehner is deeply involved in these efforts when he's Speaker of the House. And one of the congressmen who comes into power as a result of his side's remapping in North Carolina is a little-known sandwich shop owner from outside of Asheville, North Carolina, named Mark Meadows. And Mark Meadows takes over a swing district that had gone both ways in the 2000s. Republicans remap it. The Democrat who has the seat says, I can't win here. Meadows wins a primary, running as a birther. There's video out there of him saying, I'm going to send Barack Obama back to Kenya or wherever it is he comes from. And Meadows wins. He goes to Congress and he becomes the backbencher who calls for the parliamentary motion to vacate the chair that ultimately pushes John Boehner out of the House. It's Boehner and the Freedom Caucus who then make life miserable for Paul Ryan. All of these guys who we thought were pretty conservative, 5, 10, 20 years ago, Boehner, Ryan, the like, they are now, rhinos for the crowd that's in power.
Bizarre. It's totally bizarre. It's the old saying, be careful what you wish for. So let's move to this. So now, Mr. Positive, You write a new book, Unrigged: How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. I cherish this book now because I've been very depressed. Could you tell? The last few days with all the crazy. I say to you, you really are very positive here. You're going back to the grassroots. You're good for the grassroots. They can do it. They can outsmart the money. They're made of different stuff, better stuff. I love the book because it's filled with very inspiring stories that all of us need to hear these days and think the people can have the power. Tell us about your book, why you wrote it.
I had already written a book about how democracies die. I didn't think we needed another one. And the bookstores were becoming filled with them. I wanted to write a book about how people fight back. And I was inspired by it because, when you write a book about gerrymandering and voter suppression, you feel like there's a rain cloud above your head. You're the a guy in Peanuts who always has the dark cloud floating over him, who sucks all the air out of the room. I became greatly inspired by the citizen efforts that were taking place to push back against these big structural barriers. So the fight to win voting rights for former felons in Florida, the fight to win redistricting reform in Michigan, in Colorado, in Missouri, in Utah, the battle for Native American voting rights in North Dakota and Arizona and Nevada and Utah, the fight to win ranked choice voting in Maine. There were these amazing transpartisan citizen efforts to stand up and fight back for big structural reform, even though it was really, really hard, even though there was only a small chance of victory. And yet all of these people found a way to win. I went out to Idaho, crimson red Idaho, right? The color of Taylor Swift's lipstick, Idaho, where there's usually somewhere between 4 and 5 Democrats in the state house, period. And there were these activists who were determined to expand Medicaid in a state in which there were tens of thousands of people, hardworking people, who just fell in between the gap between Obamacare and the state exchange. They were paying their taxes to Washington. Their dollars were going, but the state wouldn't take them back to expand the program. And these activists, after 6 years of the legislature refusing to do this, they bought an RV and they just started driving around the state collecting signatures for a petition drive. And they won. They expanded Medicaid in Idaho with more than 61% of the vote. I mean, how does that happen? In Michigan, you have this amazing young woman. She worked at a recycling plant. And 2 days after the 2016 election, she posts on Facebook that she wants to do something about gerrymandering in Michigan. And if you want to join her, sign up for a Facebook group. And this one social media post leads to a redistricting revolution in Michigan that generates something like 4,000 volunteers who go out and collect 432,000 signatures. And they get a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Michigan, and they win with more than 62% of the vote. You'll have an independent commission drawing the lines in one of the most gerrymandered states in the nation in 2021. None of this stuff is easy. And none of it means that these fights are over, right? I mean, a lot of these fights have been undermined by gerrymandered legislatures. We saw it in Florida on felon voting rights. We see it in Missouri on redistricting. But that's okay, because we've been fighting about these issues for as long as we've been a nation. The fight for voting rights in this country didn't end after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution were passed. It didn't end with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. What matters, I think, is that people are in the game and they're fighting back, and that they recognize that this is a long fight, but that they have to be in it.
I love it. I will say that I just got a text that said the Texas Supreme Court just blocked mail-in voting. All right. That's the world. So it's wonderful when you find people like this who do care. And, you see it all the time, David. You see it on Twitter. You see it on Facebook. People care. It's nice to see the ones who have find the chutzpah, if you will, to move forward with it and say, we're going to make a difference. And I'm so happy you wrote a book about making a difference, and that making a difference is hard. Yes, as you said, but possible. Even if I'm the voice of doom today.
I think we all go through our days of being the voice of doom.
It's awful. It's the worst I've had in a long time today. But I bring this up because I wanted to talk to you about also the story breaks this week about Jane Roe, who, Roe v. Wade, folks, all right? The poster child for the culture wars. I've never believed the Republicans could give a hoot about abortion. For them, everything is a wedge issue, and how you can split people apart and serve your insatiable quest for power. But here comes this story. There's a documentary that was done, I'm sure you know, and she admits on her deathbed that her admitting all of this stuff was a quid pro quo for money. And David, it barely made the front pages. I mean, everything that all of we're talking about, you can really, in our generation, trace back to this. And yet it's a very small, tiny story that doesn't reach everybody. That concerns me, because then I want to talk to you about noise. So much noise coming at us, so many websites, so many pundits, so many writers, so much information. How do you get above that for somebody like, and I do want to talk to you about this guy in Florida. I'm living in Florida these days. I'm from Loudoun County, who came up, this felon who got his life straight and came up with this concept of, felons have the right to vote. Because even as we go to press on this story today that you and I are talking, Governor DeSantis just said, even though there was a ruling by the courts yesterday that overturned all of this, that he's taken it to the Supreme Court. Felons will not vote in 2020. Talk to me. I mean, there is a lot of noise, and that's a problem too.
The noise is meant to distract us, and the noise often does distract us, right? I would, the decision in Florida the other day was so inspiring. It was a complete victory for the forces of voting rights in Florida. And this is one of the most important battles in the nation. And so if we're looking for some optimism, I mean, I would really encourage people to take a look at this story. I mean, Desmond Meade is a broken man several years ago, and he is standing in front of the railroad tracks in Miami thinking about jumping in front of the next train. He's out of prison, but still has a drug problem, still is homeless. And as he stands before those tracks, all he can think about is his life being over. The train doesn't come, and he walks across the tracks, and if he's guided almost by some magical spiritual power, he finds himself inside a drug treatment center. He checks himself in, he gets clean, he ends up completing his undergraduate degree, getting a law degree. The one thing you can't do in Florida if you've got a felon conviction is vote. And this goes back to, the days after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, right? I mean, all of these states across the South, they had to ratify those to get back in the Union after the Civil War. They had to grant citizenship and voting rights to blacks in these states. But then they passed state constitutions that made it really, really difficult and for folks to actually vote, and the black codes, and they made the crimes that poor black people were most likely to do. They made them felonies and said, if you've got a felony, you can't vote. And that's why 1.4 million people in Florida in 2018 still didn't have the right to vote. You can trace all of this stuff back to Jim Crow and history. They organized a movement in Florida that pulled together white and black, left and right, a second chance believing churchgoers and Trump loving deplorables. And they were able to do this because people still saw this as a question of basic fairness. If you had finished your sentence, you deserved your civic voice back. This was a lot of people in Florida. It was 10% of the adult population. So most folks knew somebody who was affected by this. So they were able to see this not as a partisan issue, but as a human issue. And felon voting right reinstatement won in Florida with 64% of the vote in 2018, a year in which folks elected Ron DeSantis, elected Rick Scott. Nearly 2/3 of the state also believed that former felons ought to get their civic voice back. So I think that there's, this doesn't happen if it's not Democrats, Republicans, and independents, if it's not all kinds of people So I hope that even as we feel depressed about sort of the nature of our politics and the nature of the political leadership of one party, there is still deep belief among voters and Americans of all kinds that these voting rights issues are questions of basic fairness.
It's a terrific story, and down here it's just huge, and people are very aggravated about it because we voted. The voters voted. It was a ballot initiative, and screw you voters. Well, that's happening every day down here with this particular administration. Another great story, and we really don't have time for it, but I want to have time for it because it's the story about Native Americans. I mean, with what happened in South Dakota with Kristi Noem, the governor, and coronavirus, and what they've been doing is poor people who don't even have running water, for God's sakes. And you've got Oliver Siemens.
Story.
Yeah, great story.
The story in North Dakota is unbelievable because, North Dakota has such free and fair elections that they don't even require voter registration. You're able to just walk up and vote. And in 2012, what you had was Heidi Heitkamp winning a U.S. Senate seat in North Dakota by about 2,000 votes with the help of Native American voters, the state's largest minority group. And so immediately in 2013, you begin to see voter ID bills filed. And they're surgically filed, and they're designed to make it difficult for Native Americans to vote because they're demanding the one thing that they know Native Americans don't have, which is a street address on their identification cards. And when this finally gets through the courts and is upheld, these Native American folks and their allies are able to do amazing things. They bring in folks who superimpose GIS coordinates. They create street addresses. They make cards, and they increase turnout on tribal land by 60, 70, 80% in some cases. And one of the things that happens in the 2018 election is that the first woman, a Democrat, is elected to the legislature from North Dakota. Her name is Ruth Buffalo, and she defeats the man who proposed the original voter ID bill there. So it's just an amazing story of what can happen.
I'm a little speechless, let me tell you why. Because really and truly, you're terrific. This book's terrific. We need to hear this. David has a piece in the New York Times. Take a look at it. It's a little bit negative. A little bit of the voice of doom back. But we need to know what's going on because the only way we can win is to know what we're up against. Pick up Unrigged. Pick it up. Read it. How Americans are battling back to save democracy. David Daley is so inspiring in what he's written. You will be inspired. You will pick up, maybe, and do something to help save democracy. David, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I've been speaking with David Daley. If you're a concerned citizen and you want to take your country back, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy is the book for you. For more information on David's work, visit fairvote.org and amazon.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.